What's up, Internet? This is Rambling Josh, and today I'm speaking to you from a very different location than normally, which is not important, but hey, that's a thing. So today I want to talk to you about loot boxes, which is a topic that's been in the news a little bit lately because of a game called Shadow of War, which, if you didn't know, is the sequel to Shadow of Mordor, which is kind of like the Lord of the Rings cross Assassin's Creed game that came out about 3 years ago. It's about like dominating orcs and all this crazy stuff. So anyways, the sequel, they announced a while ago that there are going to be loot boxes in Shadow of War, which made a lot of people very upset. So I figured, why not choose that as my first topic to talk about making videos again. This is one that I've kind of had an opinion on for quite a while now at this point, which is kind of unrelated, but I can kind of hopefully take the two and tackle them both in the same video. So just for a little bit of perspective, my opinions on loot boxes is largely formed by the fact that I was working in making mobile games, specifically free-to-play mobile games, for about 3 years. And as you may or may not know, the concept of loot boxes is primarily one that people, at least today, associate with free-to-play games. So I figured to start, I should probably start off by defining what a loot box technically is. And I think you could probably give it a lot of definitions, but what I would define it as is basically just a mechanic in a game wherein the player is trading a resource in order to get a randomized reward. And you can break that down a lot. If you were to call time a resource, then you could probably technically say that like every reward in some games is technically a loot box. And I don't think that would be necessarily wrong. But typically what we think of as loot boxes today is something where you're trading either real-life money to get a randomized reward, which is the way that a lot of mobile games monetize themselves these days, or you have some kind of free resource that you accrue over a lot of time that you trade in order to get those loot boxes. But the reason I'm kind of starting here is I think it's important to recognize that loot boxes as a mechanic is something that has kind of existed a lot longer than I think people realize. Especially if you abstract away like the physical like box aspect of it. So just as a couple of examples, if you think to, I think all of the Diablo games, there are vendors in those games wherein you can purchase an item. I think it's literally called a gamble of some sort, wherein you're purchasing an item and you know what the base item is, but you don't know what the enchants on the item are. So you're spending a fairly large amount of money to have a chance of getting something with really good enchants on it. Or it could have really awful enchants. But the point there is that you're exchanging gold for potentially very strong items. And that is essentially a loot box. If you think of Borderlands, technically you're not exchanging an actual resource for a lot of the boxes, but you'll find literal crates of randomized rewards strewn all across Borderlands. A lot of them are actual like physical, like actual literal boxes. And like the boxes themselves have qualities and all that kind of stuff. And just in general, the idea of a randomized reward is something that has existed for a very long time in games. Heck, there's even a real-life service, I think it's called Loot Crate, where you can pay them like a monthly amount, and every month they'll send you a literal, actual, physical crate of like real-life loot that's like randomized. It follows a theme, but it's randomized. You're gonna get like shirts and lanyards and figurines and like whatever, but it's random. It's literally a real-life loot box. So why would someone use loot boxes as a reward in their game? There's a lot of reasons, actually. In fact, I would say that loot boxes as a reward mechanism is actually really clever for the most part because they have so much going for them. I'll try not to delve too deep into like super specific nitty-gritty here, but basically it comes down to a loot box is essentially the player is gambling. And we all know how successful casinos are, right? You're getting that endorphin hit it's essentially analogous to pulling a lever on a slot machine. But there are a few main differences between a loot box and a slot machine that make it even that much better. So one is the fact that with a slot machine, you are essentially exchanging currency for currency. You're putting money in, or tokens in, or whatever, however the casino works, and you're getting the same currency back out again, typically. You're basically exchanging dollars for dollars. And so because of that, a slot machine, the way it has to work, because the purpose of a slot machine is for the casino to make money, is that on average, you will always spend more on the slot machine than you get out of it, because that is how making money through randomized events works. And where a loot box is advantageous is because you're not exchanging one for the other. The player is inherently rewarded more, or at least they feel like they're rewarded more for opening it than they would for pulling a slot machine. So if your investment in this loot box is time, then you can kind of conceive that as 100% reward. You're not actually spending anything on that loot box, technically. Or a lot of times in these games, you're spending a resource that you can fairly easily get a lot of, or however these games work. But the point is, you're not spending the same resource that you're getting back out of it. So it almost turns into a kind of like exchange of resources, so to speak. And the second way that these two things are primarily different is because of the concept of time. If you think of a slot machine, a lot of times, at least the people that I know who've played slot machines, they want to pull the lever a whole bunch of times in quick succession. And usually loot boxes are not constructed in a way in which you can actually do that. There's kind of, you can typically, at least these days, you can think of loot boxes that come in two categories. One is you pay for the loot box and potentially you get a whole bunch of them at the same time. And yeah, in that situation you can pull the lever a bunch of times in a row. And if you're talking about a free-to-play game, if someone has paid to do that, then you've already gotten what you need out of them. I think the statistic is something like 97% of free-to-play players will never spend a penny on your game. So if you've convinced someone to spend money to pull that lever a bunch of times, then you basically already won. But the other situation is that more often people get the kind of like free loot boxes, which is I was talking about earlier, and is a time investment rather than a monetary one. And the reason this is important is because you don't have the ability to pull the lever quickly, you're kind of forced to break up how often you open these loot boxes over a long period of time. Whether that's like one every day, one every few hours, like one every week, I don't know. But the point is, there's kind of like deferred enjoyment here. And the reason this is good for video games is because that brings you on kind of like the other side, like of monetizing your game, and that's retention. If you convince the player that they need to open the boxes, if you've done your job correctly, they want to open them. So they're going to stick around because they want to open more boxes. And if you're saying you can only open a box every day, then they're going to want to come back every day, and that is also, in a way similar to gambling, that is habit forming. And these are all things that kind of land, I think, in the benefits of designing your game to support loot boxes. And even on top of those, there's things like randomized rewards in general are kind of a good idea just because they make the game more dynamic. If you've ever started one of these free-to-play games with people that you know and you've played at the same time as them, a lot of times these storylines develop over, who got what characters. Because a lot of times these games will have, right at the start of the game, you get like a free, like super awesome loot box, and that gives you some super awesome character, and everyone's probably going to get different ones. So you'll talk about like, what did you get? What's cool about what you got? Like, that creates conversation about the game, which is 100% like a super, super good thing. If you were reading, say, Twitter around the time that Fire Emblem Heroes came out on mobile, you probably saw a lot of people posting pictures of the summons that they got on on Twitter. And it's the same idea, right? Like, look at the characters that I got. Who did you get? So this is all to say that loot boxes are actually, in my mind, a really good mechanic. But there's a lot of downsides to them too. And I'm not necessarily going to talk about the downsides so much because I think a lot of them are kind of like artificial, or they're more a result of the environment that the loot boxes are in rather than the loot boxes themselves. So this kind of comes down to two main things. The first is I might as well start talking about Shadow of War, because Shadow of War is a paid game. I don't know much about it, to be honest. I assume that it is a full-priced AAA release, $60 or whatever your regional equivalent is, and that's a lot of money to spend on a game. So I think the primary argument against this is a paid, full-price AAA release, and you're asking your players to potentially, not even necessarily asking them, but giving them the option of spending even more money than that, and not in the form of like DLC, because at least with DLC you're getting extra content or for the money that you're spending, whereas with these loot crates you're essentially asking the player to spend money to play your game less. And that's the main argument that a lot of people have, and I thought a fair bit about this, and I think that the people making those arguments are correct in saying that asking your player to spend more money to get things that are already within the game is pretty grimy. And just the idea of trying to monetize players on top of that $60 without giving them extra content is, in my opinion, just really, really, really wrong. It's double dipping, but worse. Kind of. Because, like, you can, in my mind, when I think of the idea of double dipping, I think like a paid service, like say an MMO subscription that has microtransactions in it. But a lot of times those are at least getting you like skins or pets or whatever. Whereas this is literally like, I'm pretty sure that the loot boxes in Shadow of War serve the purpose of giving you orcs. So basically it's down to the concept of you're paying to skip content, or you're paying to go at an accelerated rate, which in a free space, I think that's pretty reasonable, because a lot of times these free-to-play games are designed in such a way that they're purposely very, 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 very grindy, because you want to get players hooked, and then you want to be like, okay, now you've gotten a certain distance, your progress is really slow, you're hooked on this game, so why don't you pay to speed things up a little bit? And the game is designed to support this. Whereas a $60 experience should not be designed this way. It should be designed so that you can experience the game in its full and not feel the need to have to accelerate your experience. Because you can't really have it both ways. Either you are impacting your paying player's experience by making it unnecessarily grindy, or you are affecting the experience of the people who do pay by making them absurdly overpowered and destroying your balance curve and all this awful stuff. So on the whole, I think that in this specific context, there's basically no way to set it up such that the system is a good thing to have in your game. Don't get me wrong, I think this game will still be very popular, and I'm sure that they will make a lot of money off of this, but I consider this to be an extremely anti-consumer and just kind of, maybe not morally reprehensible, just really grimy practice. It's just not a really good thing to have in your game. But the problems with loot boxes don't end there, at least not for me. Because this concept of seeing loot boxes pop up as a kind of like front and center kind of idea is something that we're seeing more and more in the AAA space in general. We're seeing more and more like Borderlands type games where I guess even Destiny falls into this category as well, which I guess they're both like looter shooters or whatever, and then you've got what's it called, Anthem coming up from BioWare. Is it BioWare? I think so. And then there's The Division from Ubisoft, and there's just all like they're all the looter shooter like genre. So I guess it makes sense. But at the same time, I can't help but getting this feeling that loot boxes, they're so effective, they're so good at what they do, that people are trying to take those and integrate them into other formats. And to me, I feel like I'm just sick of them. Like, I feel like at this point, they're kind of slipping into the category of lazy design, wherein they're not being used anymore because of their inherent design advantages. They're being used because it's like a known thing that they do X, Y, Z, and people are just like, this is a thing, we're gonna put it in the game and everyone's gonna love it, and we know it's a proven fact that they do all these cool things to your game. They make it a storyline that you can talk about with other people. It's a randomized experience, so you have to keep coming back to get all the good stuff, and it's thrilling, it's got the gambling effect and XYZ, right? Whereas the proper way to integrate anything into your game is to be very thoughtful, very cognizant about making it work for you. It's kind of the same idea of how we have so many Souls-like games now, right? Where we've got these like hard games where you've got your campfires or bonfires, whatever they're called. I can't think of it right now. And it's like you die and you go back to your campfire, and then you got to go reclaim your souls and all this stuff. And it's like, it's the same idea where games are integrating that mechanic just wholesale without thinking about what is right for their game, so to speak. And it's just lazy design. Whereas I kind of feel like, at least when you have a full, not even necessarily a full price, but like a paid experience, there's probably a better way than loot boxes to integrate the same ideas into your game and arrive at a better place. Like, maybe if you're trying to reward your player, you don't reward them by throwing the 20th loot box they've seen today at them. Maybe you have an actual equipment curve, maybe you have equipment that you can purchase from an NPC, imagine that. Maybe you do have randomized loot, but it's like you get actual loot instead of a physical box. There's so many ways of making a video game. There's ways that have been done a million times before, and we know that they work. There's an infinite number of ways that we've never even thought of before. And I would just like to see people relying on loot boxes less. When I look at a game, or when I look at a design document and someone's like, oh, we can give loot boxes to the player for doing this, that just, to me, like, I don't feel this sense of like elation anymore when I look at a loot box. To me, it's just like, really? Like, okay, what's gonna be inside this thing? Like, to me, I want to be able to attach a task to a reward, and when you're opening a loot box, it's specifically and purposefully detached. You're specifically saying you get to pull something out of the pool of possible prizes. You get to play the crane game and see what you get. And I just think that, you know, we're better than this as an industry, and we can do better. So, just kind of in general, I don't have any problem with the idea of loot boxes as a whole. Like, they're really clever, they're really smart, they do their job really well, but like, not in all contexts. They're not always the go-to answer, they're not always a good thing to have, and they're just lazy. I'm just so tired of them. Please no more loot boxes.